It wasn't just another gloomy day in Wexham. It felt like the kind of day that didn't want to end. A wet, creeping fog swallowed the town's edges, and rain slicked the cobblestones with a film of decay. Martin Holloway had been coming to Barrister's Antiques for years, yet something about this visit felt heavier. He was 52, practical, and deeply skeptical of the paranormal, despite being surrounded by forgotten relics and artifacts. But this particular painting, the one whispered about in online collector circles, was different. It had no title, no artist, no history, just a rumor that it once belonged to a family that vanished, and anyone who looked at it too long swore they heard it breathe. The shop owner, Mr. Bertram, who never spoke more than 10 words per transaction, simply pointed him to the back room and walked away, as if he didn't want to be part of the exchange. The canvas was enormous, wrapped in stiff oilcloth and bound in decaying twine. Martin's fingers hesitated, then pulled. The moment the cover slid away, a wave of cold, unseasonal and unnatural, brushed his skin. The painting depicted a family of 5 in a formal Victorian setting, yet something was wrong. Their postures were unnaturally rigid, their faces detailed yet lifeless, as if someone had captured a breath that should never have been held. The wallpaper in the background peeled in patches, and the dark space between the family members was suffocating. He didn't ask questions. He paid in cash and carried it to his car, like he was smuggling something alive. At home, Martin didn't rush to hang it. He left it leaning against the wall in his study, half draped in its cloth, telling himself he just needed time to find the right spot. But the truth was, it unnerved him. That night, he sat across from it, sipping tea, watching how the shadows around it didn't quite match the room's lighting. Even when he looked away, he felt its presence, like a guest who never introduced themselves but lingered anyway. Around 3:00 a.m, he jolted awake to the sound of footsteps. Bare, slow, deliberate. They echoed through his hallway, then stopped just outside his study. But when he rushed over, heart hammering in his throat, nothing was there, except the painting, uncovered. Its father figure seemed closer to the foreground, and something was wrong with the child's eyes. They looked like smudges now, pitch black, almost reflective. Martin stared for nearly 2 full minutes before finally draping the cloth back over it, double knotting the corners. He locked the study and left the hallway light on all night, something he hadn't done since childhood. The following days blurred together in a strange rhythm. Martin began avoiding the study, yet every time he walked past it, he swore he heard muffled voices, like someone arguing in the next room, but through water. He tried to ignore it. He blamed stress, blamed aging, until one morning, the voices were no longer muffled. They were clear, hissing syllables in a language he didn't understand, chanting from behind the locked door. He burst in, expecting squatters or speakers left running. Nothing, except that the painting was no longer leaning against the wall. It was upright, mounted perfectly, centered above the fireplace. He hadn't done that. By then, the painting had changed. The eldest daughter, who once sat stiffly beside her mother, was now facing the viewer directly. Her eyes were sharp, alert, and her mouth slightly open, as if frozen mid-breath. The shadow behind the family had darkened, becoming a swirling void that stretched upward into the painted ceiling. Martin's breath caught. This wasn't just a painting anymore. It was evolving, responding, watching. In desperation, he called Lisa, his old friend. a former art historian turned folklore researcher. She had a dry sense of humour and zero tolerance for theatrics. When she arrived, she barely greeted him before being pulled toward the study. The moment she saw the painting, her face slackened. "You bought this?" she whispered. "Martin, you absolute idiot." She circled the canvas, hands trembling. "This isn't oil, it's something else. Mixed with bone pigment, maybe. Look, these brush strokes, no human hand moves like this. The background, it's wrong. It bends inward." Lisa knelt, almost entranced, then jerked back. "Burn it," she snapped. "Right now. This thing is not dormant." Her tone, rarely serious, was stripped of humour. Martin tried to downplay it, to ground it in logic. But that night, Lisa called him from her car, crying. I saw them, Martin, in the back seat. All 5 of them. They just sat there, staring. I kept driving. I didn't stop. Don't sleep. Don't you dare sleep." Martin didn't sleep. Not really. He would close his eyes only to wake up moments later, drenched in sweat, hearing sobbing echoing down the hallway. His kitchen knives rearranged themselves in strange patterns. All his mirrors fogged from the inside. On the 4th night, he found symbols, burnt into the floorboards beneath the painting, not drawn, branded, deep, seared into the wood, like they had always been there, waiting. He started dreaming of a grey corridor, fog billowing from unseen corners. The family always stood at the far end, unmoving, except now there was a 6th figure behind them. It was blurry, shadowed, yet somehow familiar. He always woke up just before it stepped forward, always drenched in a cold sweat, unable to move for minutes, paralyzed with fear. And worst of all, he started seeing them in reflections, in the kettle, in the screen of his phone when it went black, always just watching. One night, curiosity, no, obsession, took over. He touched the painting. This time, it didn't just chill him, it pulled him, not metaphorically. The room vanished. He was no longer in his house, but in the corridor of his dreams, real now, tactile. The walls breathed. The lights flickered not from electricity, but as if shadows had a pulse. The family stood there, closer than ever, their mouths opened in sync. "Join us," they said, not in unison, but layered, echoing from in his skull. He turned and ran. Doors stretched away, always 10 steps farther than they should be. Hands brushed his shoulders, his back, his neck. The corridor looped. No matter where he turned, he ended up back at the painting, suspended like a window. He dove through it with all his strength. Everything went black. He awoke on the floor, teeth chattering. The painting was gone. In its place, a mirror, cracked at the top corner. But the reflection showed the family behind him. Every time he looked, they were closer, day by day. Lisa disappeared the next week. Her apartment was locked from the inside, her phone on the counter, her tea still warm, but no sign of her. Martin became a ghost in his own life. Friends stopped visiting. Lights blew out. He covered the mirror with a cloth, then locked the room entirely. But one morning, the cloth was folded neatly on the floor, the mirror spotless. And the reflection now had 6 figures. He realized the 6th shape was himself, but smiling, and his eyes pitch black. 3 weeks later, Martin vanished. His house was empty, no struggle, no sign of a break-in, all doors locked from the inside. But the mirror remained, and now, in every photograph taken inside that room, No matter where the camera points, the family appears, and if you look long enough, you might just notice one more detail. The reflection sometimes changes. One day, it might show you standing among them, smiling. It started with an envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just my name, Daniel, written in faint, trembling cursive on yellowed paper. I'd just walked in from a double shift at the hospital, the kind of exhausting day where your bones feel like they've absorbed someone else's sadness. The hallway outside my apartment was quiet, dim, the overhead bulb flickering like it had a pulse of its own. The envelope was lying there, centered perfectly on the mat like someone had placed it with ceremonial precision. I almost tossed it out without thinking, but then I saw the handwriting. It looked exactly like my mother's. The long loops on the D, the way she crossed her T's with a slight hook. I froze. She died last March. I buried her myself. I remember the coldness of her fingers when I held her hand in the casket. I took the envelope to the kitchen and opened it with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, confusion laced with dread. Inside was a single photograph, no letter, no explanation, just a photo that looked old, yet strangely vibrant, like it had been taken yesterday. It showed a dirt road deep in the woods, Piersfield Hollow. I hadn't seen that place since I was 11, but something was off. The trees looked warped, unnaturally tall, with shadows clinging to them like they were trying to pull free. The road twisted in a way I didn't remember, and in the bottom right corner of the photo, nearly hidden, was the faint silhouette of a person, tall, thin, leaning ever so slightly, faceless, like they were waiting. On the back of the photo, in that same delicate handwriting, were 4 words: "You left her behind." I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the photo until the sky outside turned from black to bruised blue. Every so often I'd flip it over, reread the words, and feel that growing sense of nausea. What did it mean? Who was her? Why now? By morning, I'd convinced myself it was nothing, a prank, a disturbed stranger. But the image, it lingered. It felt like a knot in my chest I couldn't ignore. Against my better judgment, I took the photo with me, packed a small bag, and drove north. The route to Piersfield Hollow felt etched into my memory like a scar. Old signs half swallowed by moss, abandoned gas stations with broken windows, power lines sagging over empty roads. I hadn't been there in 24 years, and yet I didn't need GPS. My hands knew the turns before my eyes did. As I crossed into the forest boundary, something strange happened. My phone buzzed violently with a static noise, then went completely dead. Not just the signal, the entire phone, like something had sucked the life out of it. I looked around. The trees stood too still, not a rustle, not a bird. It was like the forest was holding its breath. The house shouldn't have been there. I knew that with certainty. We never stayed in a house. My mother didn't believe in cabins or lodges. She said tents kept you humble, kept you close to the earth. But as I pulled into the clearing, there it was. A 2-story farmhouse choked in ivy and shadow. The paint peeled in long strips, like skin after a burn. Every window was cracked or dark, but the front door hung open just slightly, like it had been waiting. I don't know what made me enter. Maybe it was the smell, a mix of damp earth and rotting wood. Maybe it was the part of me that needed answers. Inside, it was cold. Not cool, cold. As if the air had been drained of warmth decades ago and never bothered to return. I stepped inside, and the door eased shut behind me on its own. The living room looked lived in. Faded armchairs, a sagging couch, doilies on every surface. Dust coated everything, except for one thing, a mirror above the fireplace. It gleamed like it had just been polished. I stepped toward it and froze. My reflection stood still, but behind me, she stood. A woman, white dress, long, matted hair, mouth half open, as if she was mid-whisper or scream. Her eyes were sunken, but wide. I turned around in a panic. No one. Back to the mirror. Nothing. But now I saw it. Words etched into the lower corner of the glass. So faint I almost missed them. She never left. Night fell quickly in Piersfield, like a curtain dropping without a warning. I found a stack of old blankets and made a makeshift bed in the corner of the living room, close to the candlelight. The upstairs groaned with each gust of wind, but no wind reached the inside of the house. It was sealed off, isolated. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up to voices. At first I thought it was a radio. Muffled words, indistinct, like someone talking behind a thick wall. But it grew clearer, whispers that slid between the cracks of the floorboards and breathed into my ear. "You left her." I sat up, heart thudding like a drum. The air was frigid, and I could see my breath. I grabbed my flashlight. Nothing. Dead. The phone. Still dead. Then came footsteps. Soft, but staggered. And not from above. From beneath. There was no basement. At least there shouldn't be. I stood completely still, listening. And then I heard something knock from inside the wall right behind me. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Morning light never reached the forest like it should have. It filtered in, grey and weak, barely illuminating the house. Still shaken, I searched every inch of the place, trying to find the source of the sounds. Behind the staircase, I found it. A panel of wood, slightly off colour with a faint seam running down the middle. I pried it open with a rusty fireplace tool. A narrow staircase led down into darkness that felt thick. The air was colder with every step. By the time I reached the bottom, my fingertips were numb. The room was stone, circular, and in the middle, a single chair sat under a dangling bulb that flickered to life as I stepped in. On the walls were photographs, hundreds of them, black and white, sepia, even some Polaroids, all of terrified people, different eras, different faces, same expressions, eyes wide, mouths mid-scream. And then I saw her, bound to the chair with rope, skin ghostly, eyes open, lips stitched shut, with thread so old it had yellowed into the skin. She looked just like my mother, but older, emptier. She tried to move, to lift her arms, but only managed a twitch. I staggered back, hitting the wall, and as I watched, she tilted her head and opened her mouth, ripping through the threads with a tearing sound that made my stomach turn. And she screamed, but no sound came, only darkness. When I came to, I was lying on the forest floor. No wounds, no blood, just dirt under my nails and a torn photo in my jacket pocket. It was the same photo, but now I was in it, standing in the corner, just like the figure before, watching from the shadows. I stumbled back to my car, barely able to breathe. My phone buzzed back to life as soon as I crossed the tree line. I drove non-stop back to the city, but something inside me knew I hadn't come back alone. It's been 3 weeks. Every mirror in my apartment now reflects more than it should. Not just me, but the house, the chair, her, the woman in white, closer each time. Sometimes I see myself behind the glass staring blankly while I move in real time. 2 nights ago, I woke up with blood on my hands and words carved into the bathroom mirror. Now it's your turn. I think it's starting. The air doesn't move anymore. Time stutters. I hear her voice when I try to sleep, soft and endless. You left her. You left yourself. I don't know how this ends, but if you ever get a letter with no return address, don't open it, because some places never forget, and some spirits never forgive. The house didn't sit right with Andrew from the start. Not that anything obvious was wrong with it. No sagging roof, no broken windows, no ominous red flags. But it had a stillness to it. The kind of silence you usually only find in churches or hospitals or tombs. It stood on the edge of a quiet street in Vermont, its brick exterior browned by decades of weather, its chimney leaning slightly like a tired old man resting on his cane. Andrew and his wife Mara bought it at a shockingly low price. The agent had stammered a bit when asked why it was listed for nearly 40% under market value, mumbling something about the seller wanting a quick closure. They should have run, but after 6 months of apartment hunting and rejected bids, this seemed like the answer they were waiting for. Still, that little door upstairs, thin, almost child-sized, set Mara on edge the moment they stepped inside. She stood in front of it, pale, tense. "Promise me you'll never open it," she said. Andrew chuckled, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. The nights were the worst. The first few evenings passed uneventfully, with Andrew unpacking boxes and Mara obsessively cleaning corners no one would ever see. But then came the noises, faint, irregular, unmistakable. Andrew would wake in the middle of the night, unsure if it was the creaking wood or if someone had whispered directly into his ear. He'd lie motionless, heart pounding, straining to hear. Always the sound returned. Not voices exactly, but breathing. Like someone, no, something, was resting behind the walls. He tried to laugh it off, brushing it aside as house settling or his own nerves. But it got worse. One night, while walking past the small door to get to the bathroom, he felt something cold and damp run across the back of his neck, like a child's hand made of ice. He spun around expecting to see Mara playing a prank, but no one was there. Only the door, silent, watching. Mara became distant, withdrawn. She'd spend hours sitting in the old armchair by the fireplace, staring into the far corner of the ceiling. Sometimes her lips would move, silently mouthing something over and over. Andrew caught her doing it once and gently touched her shoulder. She flinched like she'd been stabbed. "She says the air's too loud," Mara whispered, not meeting his eyes. "She says you breathe like the living." That night, Andrew lay awake, replaying those words. The next morning, he found claw marks under the paint on the inside of the bedroom closet. Not scratches, actual claw marks. Deep, angry, and next to them, someone had written, in a reddish smear, "You let her in." Desperate for answers, Andrew began researching the house's history. What he found chilled him. The house once belonged to Esther Lang, a woman whose name hadn't appeared in public records for over 60 years. She was described as quiet but strange in the old neighborhood archives. Always seen in black, never speaking to children, always carrying books she never returned to the library. One winter in 1956, neighbors reported a foul smell coming from her home. Police forced their way in. They found her inside that very room, the small one Mara had refused to open. She was seated in a wooden chair, perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, but her face was gone. Not ripped off or mutilated, just gone. Smooth skin where her features should be. But even more disturbing, the police report said the room had no door. It had been sealed from the inside. So what, Andrew wondered, was this door they had now? The morning Mara disappeared, Andrew had gone to get groceries. When he returned, her car was still in the driveway. Her shoes were by the door, but the house was silent. He called her name, once, twice, 20 times. No answer. He sprinted upstairs. The narrow door was open. Inside, there was a chair, a wooden chair, aged, cracked, like it had been there for 100 years. Mara sat on it, unmoving, her face bathed in dim orange light from a lamp that hadn't existed before. Her eyes were wide. Her mouth whispered non-stop, though no sound came. When Andrew tried to touch her, she didn't react. But the door slammed shut behind him. He was trapped. The room twisted around him. What had been a simple storage space now stretched endlessly into shadows. The air was wrong, thick, like breathing soup. The walls pulsed gently as if alive. Shadows moved within them, crawling and whispering and pressing outward. And then a voice spoke, not loud, not angry, but final. "Now you see." Mara turned to him, her eyes now entirely black. She opened her mouth and hundreds of whispering voices poured out, words in languages he didn't recognize. Some he didn't think were human. The walls began to close in. He screamed, but no sound came. The room wasn't just a space anymore. It was a passage, and he was already halfway through it. When Andrew opened his eyes, he was standing in a copy of their home, but drained of color, hollow and silent. Shadows moved like echoes. The furniture was there, but wrong, tilted, twisted. It felt like he was walking inside a memory that didn't belong to him. And always, just beyond view, was Mara. He'd see the hem of her dress vanish around a corner. He'd follow, shouting, pleading, but she remained always one room ahead. He met others in that place, people with blurred faces and whispered names. Some screamed at him to leave, others begged him to take them with him. But he couldn't find the exit. The house kept shifting, bending itself. Time didn't move right there. He slept but never rested, ate but never felt full. He was no longer in a house. He was inside something else's mind. Outside, the real house decayed unnaturally fast. In just 2 months, the new owners found themselves chased out by a smell so thick it choked the hallway. The narrow door wouldn't stay locked. It bled, a thick, black liquid that hissed when touched. The next buyer lasted 3 days. A priest was called in. Midway through his ritual, he collapsed and screamed, "This house is not a house, it's a mouth." To this day, no one stays in that home for more than a week. And yet, on some nights, flickering light can be seen under that small door. And sometimes, only sometimes, if you get close enough, you'll hear a man's voice, calling out, asking for help. But no matter how fast you open it, the room is always empty.